Today, I welcome Kirsty Rowlinson-Groves to the Conveners podcast. Previously, the GM Active Prehab for Cancer lead and driving force behind its successful, award-winning delivery. Hear how Kirsty's heartbreaking yet inspiring personal story drove her to want to push back at cancer, and why her purpose is to help people every day in any way she can. Now working in the voluntary sector with 10 GM, Kirsty offers a refreshingly honest and constructive perspective that can help the sector better understand how to approach working with health and other sectors more effectively, and why we need to be wary of simply talking to ourselves and to engage a much broader audience. Welcome, Kirsty. Welcome to the Conveners podcast, and thank you very, very much for your time. Lovely to see you.
Yeah, you too.
So we're going to start off with asking you to just bring us up to date on your career all the way through. And if you can, just sort of think about how physical activity has played a role in both your career and outside of your career during that time, please.
Okay, so originally it wasn't the plan at all. I didn't really have a plan, so I, like every kid who's good at sport, went to university to do PE because that was the only career pathway. Quickly remembered that I really hate children, which is weird sat here like 4.5 months pregnant. I really didn't want to teach children to do a front row. So at the same time, my mum was quite poorly, so I dropped out of my first degree to come home to look after my mum, which was a really good decision because it also introduced me to cardiac rehab because she was recovering from heart surgery. And in that was a realisation around there's other things, not just being a PE teacher, but I had no idea how to do it. So I went and got a job at Bupa doing e-commerce as it was then. I think now it'd be called social media. And I loved that job, I really did, but there was also this yearning that I wasn't helping people, and I really wanted to finish my day's work to say that I helped somebody. It was really important to me. So I spoke to my partner at the time and decided to go back to university. Again, the only thing that was coming up was sports science, and I was like, I don't want to be a sports scientist. And then I found exercise, physical activity and health, it was called, at Salford University, which was an amazing degree to find. It was all about, so you did all the sports sciencey stuff, you did the kinesiology, the physiology, the exercise physiology. And then the other half of the course, they took you into clinical populations and started to look at all sorts of different health conditions and how that affects your natural response to exercise, and really embedded cardiac rehab principles in my education, but also all other long-term health conditions. And then off the back of that, I got a placement with Salford Community Leisure, and then that turned into a job, thankfully. And I stayed with them throughout my junior years as an exercise instructor, really. They put me through industry qualifications to back up my university qualifications, which is one of my bugbears about qualifications.
Right, come on to that.
Yeah. And then I became a exercise referral instructor. Around about the same time, there was a pot of money going for cancer rehab. And there seemed to be, it was me and my manager, Louise Sword, at the time, talking about there's rehab for everything, but there's not rehab for cancer. There was nobody doing cancer. So we put in a bid, really small money, just testing out rehabilitation for breast cancer, prostate cancer, and bowel cancer in Salford. And that was known as CanMove, which is still going today. And that was my introduction into cancer care, which was brilliant. Loved it, creating a rehab program around cancer patients. That grew an idea of prehab for cancer with other stakeholders, which I'm sure we'll get onto. So then I managed the prehab for cancer program, and then most recently came out of public leisure to be a strategic lead in cancer and health inequalities with the VCSE sector. So, right, okay. Whistle-stop tour.
Yeah. So in terms of physical activity for yourself,
yes,
how's that played a role over the years?
So, as I said, from being a kid always active, like any council estate kid is. You're always out. I was brought up by two brothers predominantly, so as soon as I could stand on 2 feet, I was playing football with them. And then when I finished high school, didn't really do much around physical activity because there was more fun stuff to be doing, let's say. So I sort of fell out of physical activity a lot. Didn't really go to the gym, wasn't a gym. I hate the gym, still hate the gym. But not being very active at all, but knowing that I should be, always at the back of my head. And then when my mum got poorly, that's what brought me back to be like, you know, that's a pathway that you could be on, you need to sort it out. So then I got the really strong link to health with my physical activity. And luckily I did, because it turned out that I myself did have a heart condition. I had a congenital heart disease, which is a hole in the chambers of my heart, which I discovered at 31. Most people discover it at about 2 years of age. So my heart wasn't performing particularly well. But the cardiologist was saying it was because of my activity up until that point that it not really affected me too much.
Right.
And then I had to go through open heart surgery and went through cardiac rehabilitation as well, which was really good fun. So luckily for me, it was always, I think, seeing those around me being quite poorly and in ill health got me back on track, which did me really good for my own personal health.
Yeah. You mentioned in your previous answer about wanting to help people.
Yes.
In terms of your why currently today, what sort of gets you up in the morning? What's your purpose?
I always go back to, I want to finish my working day knowing that I helped somebody in that day. It's really important to me. And sometimes that could be just, you know, putting somebody in contact with the right phone number or something really simple. But a lot of the time it's a lot more impactful than that. In cancer, it brings it to the front a lot more. Cancer is really powerful, really scary, really dark. So it's really important that you can help somebody in that situation. And my why got even more powerful because I lost my husband to cancer in 2016. God, I should remember that year. So we just got married, and John complained of backache, which, you know, he worked in pubs, why wouldn't he have backache? But then it materialised that actually it was a kidney tumour. At that point, I'd started to try to run as well to help my own fitness, and that running really helped in that really dark days of that cancer diagnosis. So I think going through that and being on the wrong side of that service and knowing how scary it is and how horrible it is and how dark it is, that really wanting to make it a bit lighter is really important.
Right, okay. Yeah, it's a powerful time. So almost by chance you ended up working in prehab for cancer, and yet it became incredibly real for you, didn't it, and authentic? It
did. Like, I was working in cancer rehab services before then, and thinking that, you know, I know what cancer is, like, I get it, but you really don't. Like, I was seeing patients day in, day out who had recovered from cancer, listening to their stories as awful as they are, but being able to handle it and thinking that I understood it. But then actually to be thrown into that world with that whirlwind of a cancer diagnosis to somebody so close was an eye-opener to you have no idea how amazing those people are, because you've not been through it, you don't know what they've faced.
So the Prehab for Cancer programme, obviously probably lots of people know about it. Can you tell us about it? What was your role in sort of taking it from the original concept in Salford all the way through to where we are today?
So it came around, like I said, I was in CanMove, and there was I'd started to work with the colorectal team at Salford around prehab or pre-operative exercise, as we called it then. And we developed like a little home exercise pack to give to patients at their consultation appointment. And from that, I was at a conference where I met Dr. John Moore, where he was working, unbeknownst to me, with a steering group with Trafford, Emma at Trafford and Michelle for GM Active to put together this idea. And seeing how we'd established Can Move really set the spark of, well, we can do this because we're already moving into that. So I was then invited to become part of the steering group and the task and finish group, where we developed the idea, working with the clinical teams, with Dr. John and Zoe, in order to make it clinically a robust service. It was treading new ground. Working with patients with an active disease was not something that us as exercise professionals had ever done. We always get them after the disease and build them back up. So we had to navigate that really unknown area of how we safely do this with an active disease population. So working together, we came up with a model with some researchers and James Steele as the exercise physiologist. Got funding for it, luckily. I interviewed and got the job, which was good. And we put it in place. We got it up and running. So we work with 3 cancer types: colorectal, esophageal, and I forget now. Colorectal, esophageal, and lung cancer. Yeah. Jesus, yeah, biggest numbers. So those 3 pathways were chosen because colorectal is a simple clinical pathway. There's a diagnosis, there's a surgery, there's rehab. Really quick, easy pathway to implement an intervention in. Lung, similar, but bigger numbers. And there's also an offshoot of lung where people can be treated with oncological chemotherapy or radiotherapy treatments. Esophageal was chosen because we needed to have a complex pathway to prove a theory around how you implement an intervention into such a busy, complex system. And for those that don't know about esophageal cancer, it's grueling. You have pre-operative chemotherapy, which really impacts people. It's some of the most toxic chemotherapy you can have as a patient. Then you go for one of the most grueling operations most of the time. And then you have post-operative chemotherapy as well. So you can see there that these patients are just being battered with toxins, with surgery, with toxins and chemo. And to try and place an intervention around that, where you're going to ask somebody to come into a leisure centre and start moving around and trying to plan that in between all these appointments. We just needed to test that we could do that. So that was chosen as well. It's a 3 arms, so it's physical activity, nutrition and well-being. And we're a multidisciplinary team where we refer into other bigger services when we need to.
So it's fair to say that our fitness professionals are working alongside allied health professionals and treated as such?
Definitely integrated team. So on the lung pathway, for example, a prehab cancer specialist is located in Wythenshawe Hospital 2 days a week in that clinic. They're part of the MDT there, so they sit in alongside the clinicians, the clinical nurse specialists, the surgeons, and their opinion on a patient is valued and taken in as an overall package for that patient as well.
Yeah, it's incredible. So in terms of the staff then, so you got staff who are dealing with literally life and death, yeah?
Yeah.
What sort of support do they need and get?
Yeah, so it was really important from day one that we understood that we're putting exercise and fitness professionals in situations that they're not trained to deal with. And it was really important to us that we looked after them. If you speak to 3 cancer patients back to back, you're hearing an horrific story 3 times. And then these people have to go home. So we put in place with Zoe something called reflective practice, which is a really commonplace in the NHS. And it's delivered through our clinical psychologist lead, Dr. Pod. And the staff have 6 weekly mandatory reflective practice led by Pod, where they talk about the dark aspects of the job.
Yeah.
The times where it's not gone well, where patients don't recover after surgery, where patients pass away in surgery. And they can also just get a bit of support from Dr. Pod, but also from their teammates to recognise that it is hard, and they do a lot of work around it, just supporting the staff and making sure that their well-being doesn't take too much of a hit, and just appreciating that they are dealing with patients who are in really dark places, and that needs to be recognised and supported through that reflective practice. There's also protocols in place for when they're having a bad day, when they've had bad news, when they've had a bad appointment. There's really strict protocols on how they respond to that.
Yeah, pretty exceptional people. So with an aspiration to not just in GM to expand, quite significantly, there's discussions ongoing about taking it from sort of 1,500 patients a year to through 10,000 to 20,000 and all the rest of it. What do you think the risks are, or the barriers for that happening?
So barriers are obviously resource, capacity and capabilities. The way prehab is delivered at the moment is very staff intense. It's very resource heavy. Everybody gets the same level of input from a staff member. So I think one of the barriers is that can't continue. There has to be an appreciation that not every patient needs hand-holding. Not every patient needs to be supervised at every session. So I think one of the best ways to expand is to make sure that there is a triaging element where we can stratify, where we can place patients on the pathway that they most need. So if I got cancer myself, if it was a stage 1 lung cancer, I wouldn't need hand-holding. There's no need for a staff member to be stood at the side of me on a treadmill. I'm pretty safe. I know what a treadmill is. I can manage myself. So it needs to have those sort of levels. It has to have a universal, a target, even a specialism where we can refer back into frailty specialists and oncogeriatricians and physios. A targeted approach, which is what I'd say prehab is now, but then also a universal approach, which is a lot more hands-off. They said capacity is all about the staff. Getting that amount of patients through will require a lot more staff, and it will probably require a different way of thinking about the staff team. So maybe having a hub and spoke model, maybe just upskilling the staff that we already have at centres to deliver the universal model especially, but also integrating the rehab end of it into existing services. There's not a lot of point to have prehab rehab sessions when we've got multi-comorbidity sessions happening in centres anyway. We can make use of that and integrate it a lot better. Okay,
thanks, Kirs. So just take you back a little bit, because we had this thing called COVID.
We did, I remember.
and yet the cancer didn't stop, did it?
No, and that was it was really, really important to us as a team. So we got the call about 3 weeks before Leisure got the call to shut down. We got the call from our clinical director to say, we think it's a good idea that we stop seeing people face to face. And we didn't argue with that. It was like, we could totally agree. But that doesn't mean that you can stop the service, because instantly I fell back into the day that me and John were told that he was the stage 3 cancer. I was like, you can't tell somebody that and take away a support service. There's no chance. Luckily the team are incredible, and they were very happy to come and lock themselves in a room with myself for 2 days, and we completely remodeled prehab for cancer to be a remote service. And we designed an imaginary patient who was not technological, only had a home phone and did not have access to any video or anything. And we developed a service for that patient and then built on it. So it was all paper. We designed a home exercise program that we posted out. Poor Zoe, who was a guest on the show, she was the one who was printing out and posting exercise packs. We got the team set up so they could all work from home. We made sure that everybody still had access.
And did that include actually showing people how to use the technology?
Yeah, so eventually, after we got through to the base model of paper, we then started to build technology onto it. So we started to do YouTube videos, we started my zone heart rate monitoring, but we also had to then teach people to use technology, which is a lot harder to do over the phone than it is face to face. So we created how-to guides, We created how-to tutorials that we could send people on WhatsApp, and had like very cheeky ways of getting people's family to help them and things like that. But the team did become amazing technical experts. So
yeah, superb. So what's the legacy of that been in terms of the program going afterwards? You know, when we started to come back and we could go face to face, what's been learned?
So it's improved accessibility because there are still people who don't want to access gyms for numerous reasons. So to have this really high quality remote service is brilliant. It's just really increased our accessibility. And it's also built a resource that other people can use. So YouTube, anybody can go on and search for it, and we direct other cancer alliances to it, other hospital teams, other leisure providers can all have access to that. It's all free access. It's all online.
Yeah. Right, it's very unfair because it's like I do forget sometimes that you're not still working for us, but
no, I'm really not. No.
But you still advise us, which is good. Tell us more about your job now. So you work for 10GM, yeah?
I am, yeah.
What does that entail now?
So 10GM is a partnership between local infrastructure organisations in Greater Manchester to bring together and support the local VCSE, so the voluntary community and social enterprise sector. My role as a strategic lead is around cancer and health inequalities. So when we look at cancer, there are very specific inequalities there around somebody's risk of getting cancer, the stage that it's developed, the stage that it's diagnosed, their experience of care, unfortunately, their outcomes, and also things about diversity in workforce and in research. So my role is to use the VCSE sector, who are really well placed to understand those targeted communities, those marginalised, underserved communities. The VCSE sector plays such an important part in being able to get in contact with them, to engage those communities, to deliver really tailored support for those communities. And my role is to link that into the cancer system more. So it's a really interesting role. It's a really educational role for me, and trying to mobilise a whole sector into supporting a cancer patient more by understanding that some communities require a very different way of working and a very different engagement model. So yeah, it's a really eye-opening role.
Yeah, sounds fantastic. So I mean, it goes without saying, I suppose, but the experience you've had with prehab for cancer must be very beneficial.
It is, yeah. It's really beneficial because of my understanding of the cancer system.
Yeah.
Without that innate understanding of the cancer system, I don't think I could go to a different sector and be able to understand where it's best influence it and where it best fits in and links and supports a cancer system. Right. But it's also done as well as open my eyes into how inequalities are not really looked into in referral services sometimes, and how they're not very targeted to certain communities, which has been really helpful. So yeah, I think it's given me really good insight into a cancer patient and really good insight into the cancer system, and where the VCSE sector can really influence and impact that.
Yeah. And also, the question I've got really is, sitting where you sit now, and this is one of the things we want to do with our podcast, is find people who've got informed opinions of, if you like, the leisure sector, for want of a better term, and sort of critique it in a constructive way. But before we get onto that as such, in terms of you being where you are now, is there more that we can do in GM Active to work more with 10GM and with the voluntary sector more generally? Is it becoming obvious that you're going, well, why didn't these guys do more here?
I think, yeah, there's definitely crossovers. There's definitely areas where both sectors are doing the same thing, and should link up a lot more. And there are also big areas where you can support each other in expanding your services. Yeah. There's really clear areas for that, and that's it might not necessarily be GM Active working with 10GM. It might be that localities work with the 10GM partner localities, in just understanding the nuances of geography in GM.
Is there anything pushing back about that collaboration at that sort of place, local level? Is there any Any reasons? It does seem sometimes a little bit more difficult than it should be. Is there any obvious insight you can offer there?
Yeah, so it is a lot more difficult than it should be, and it all probably boils down to economics. If there's a shared area where both parties are working, there's natural competition there. So sometimes that can get in the way. When you've got that sort of competition, then you've got egos in the way, and you've got, well, we're best placed to do that because of X, Y, and Z, or we're best placed for that because of this.
Right.
But actually, it could just be that, both of you are best placed if you work together on your own knowledge and your own expertise.
Yeah.
But come together.
Yeah. Well, interesting. We'll come on to the Sport England place-based approach a little bit later on. But before we do that, so I'm really intrigued that you've been, you've had a fantastic track record in our sector and in a very specialist bit as well. And then you've gone over and you sort of, I see you sort of looking back at this now, knowing what you know from a fresh perspective. What are the key headline things that you think that you would like we need to address?
So what shocked me was when I was in the sector, it was so loud of what was happening, and I knew the sector so well that it was a no-brainer to me why it needs to partner with health more, it needs to get more involved in that. It was just a no-brainer. Coming out of it, actually, it's very quiet. There is not a lot of talk outside of the sector of what the sector can do.
Right.
There's also not a lot of understanding of what the sector is, what's its vision, what's its purpose, what can it do, who it employs, like what's the skill level of those employees. All of that is lacking, and I think coming out the sector and seeing that was a real eye-opener for me, because I said in the sector it's so loud, and it's like, God, everyone's talking about this, and it's
an echo chamber maybe.
Yeah, definitely an echo chamber. And I was shocked at how quiet it is, and being in forums now with ICSs and ICBs and being in networks with policymakers and decision makers, and not one person dropping leisure or public pleasure or whatever you want to call it in the mix when you're looking at community-led CBD prevention programs. And that's it's very telling.
Yeah, you to be honest, you've shared a little bit of that with me previously, and this is in GM, and quite often, we are held up as being sort of at the front of our sort of integration with health and the wider system, but there's clearly still missed opportunities, which I guess we sort of would assume that we haven't cracked it by a long chalk. But it might be tougher than we may not be quite where we think we are. Is that the message? I
would say that we're not where we think we are. Or you're not where you think you are now, because I'm not a we anymore. Sorry. But yeah, I would say that it's not, and I'd say that it's a long way off. I think in GM we have got that weird and wonderful, and sometimes brilliant, and sometimes hindering geography of devolution, and 10 boroughs trying to work as one sometimes, and then one borough trying to tell 10 what to do sometimes. So I think there's brilliant examples in pockets of localities.
Yeah.
But GM wide, nowhere near the conversation. And there's only prehab for cancer. And as much as I love prehab for cancer, that it is small fry in the wider picture of GM. It's small in the wider picture of GM cancer. It's 3 tumour groups. Yeah. There's 17 pathways.
Yeah. Okay. Given that as a state of play, and I appreciate your honesty, is exactly what we're after. What's your thoughts? How do we fix this? Maybe fix is too strong a word. How do we make progress?
So I think making progress is being honest with ourselves as an industry, and saying that there isn't a direction, there isn't a vision, there's not a package that we can say this is what we're about and this is what we can do. I mean, you've had Mark in earlier today, and I think he calls it a brave and bold vision. I think sometimes he terms it. That would help, because on the outside, when you've got very busy people with very limited resources looking where to put that resource, if they don't know what you're about or what you can do, they're not going to come to you. So I think having that sort of vision is really important, whether it's a vision, a strategy, whatever it is, but to say what the sector is, why is it different than, why isn't it just a gym? Then that would really help.
Yeah, so the almost like the proposition
Yeah.
isn't clear. So is that something that can be done locally, regionally, nationally, or all of the above? Or?
I think it's all of the above. I think somebody has to start it, whether it's just a brain dump of ideas, of coming up with something. As soon as somebody starts it, you will then start to get collaboration from those that are interested, but also you really need to find collaboration for those that aren't interested. That's the other thing. You've got a lot of leisure providers who are really interested in this pivot to active well-being, but you've got some that aren't, and that needs to be sorted as well. That needs to be understood why, and coming together, a unified voice. So I think having a start point, waiting for national. We're in an election year, nothing national's going to happen, and then hopefully we're going to be in a transition of new national policies coming through, and that's going to take time. So I think waiting for it to come down is not the right action. I think getting together some really good voices to start that idea of what that could look like, then get buy-in and push it upwards. Yeah,
okay. Thanks for that. In terms of a specific element which I've always wanted to have a much closer, successful relationship with is social prescribing. And I've always felt a little bit pushed out, probably because the perception is that we're trying to get there's some money somewhere, and that age-old thing of like our sector sort of being treated as like, well, you're probably just after the money, and they might be right, actually, quite often. How can we get closer to social prescribing, do you think?
I think it's understanding what you can offer as a social prescribing provider, if that's you wanting to be closer to it, is being a provider of it. Because I think sometimes there's a sort of thought process of, we're already doing that because we can refer somebody into an active program, but social prescribing is so much wider. So I think understanding what the social prescribing landscape is for an area is really important, and who is the current provider, because they are provided by lots of different organisations, like some local infrastructure, voluntary organisations do it, some PCNs are responsible. So I think understanding the landscape of who the provider is, what they're doing and what they're really good at, what they might not be particularly good at, and how you can support them in that is getting closer to it. If you wanted to become a social prescriber provider, I think there's a lot more we need to do with our own staff workforce to upskill them in that, because it's a lot wider than just health and well-being. There's a lot around social security and housing and justice, and that I don't think that our workforce currently has the skill set in.
Okay, well that leads me nicely onto the workforce sort of transformation program. GM Active, we've been set up a GM Active Academy, and we've got things like transformational leadership that John Oxley runs for us, and work with Future Fit on all sorts of different programs and initiatives to upskill our staff, making every contact count and all the rest of it. But one thing I wanted to ask you about was the sort of, again, probably going back to prehab, to be honest, but not necessarily, is the qualifications and the status of what you need to deliver on things like prehab for cancer. What's your thoughts?
So training qualifications in the leisure sector, the thoughts is it's messy. It's a money earner for most training providers, and there isn't a standard approach to it, as like a creditable standard approach. Like if you want to deliver a clinical led program such as prehab, if you're asking a healthcare system to understand your workforce and what you can offer and why you are good at that, I think you need to sort of match their sort of training. So looking at having a training provider, not 400 million maybe, or a very minimum standard of, if you are providing this training, it has to include these modules. And that way it can be then validated, it then can be robust, it can be checked. There has to also be a retraining element. Like all of the staff that I left at Prehab for Cancer, they all did their cancer qualification years ago, 6 or 7 years ago. They've never had to revalidate. In prehab for cancer, we are very good at upskilling and CPD, and they are constantly trained by the clinical professionals we have, but there isn't a standard way of revalidating somebody. There is in cardiac rehab. Every 3 years you have to redo your qualification. So I think the cardiac rehab is like a gold standard. There's one provider which has a minimum standard. You are revalidated every 3 years. The course changes with the new information coming out through the research, which is also really important. Like when I did some of my cancer qualifications, some of the references were like 25, 30 years old.
Wow.
And if you think how quickly treatments are changing and like robotic advances are coming in and loads of things change every year, and it's not being added on to qualifications. So I think qualifications do need to have a different format around recognising that revalidation is important, minimum standards, they can be checked. I think the workforce has to carry a reflective practice with them as well. I think that's really important to upskill and to basically raise the bar of somebody's qualification, so it's not just a tick box, because I think sometimes they can be seen as a tick box. And I think that's really important for the staff themselves. And also working with higher education providers and university institutes and looking at their syllabuses and recognising that some of their qualifications actually does mean that they're able to do a job. They don't need to then go and do an industry qualification. They should be able to convert. Because I had to redo loads of industry qualifications with a degree. It was very strange. So I think that conversion of academic knowledge, if you like, is really important as well.
It's fantastic insight, Kirsty, and I know you've got lots of thoughts on that. And I mean, the sponsors of this podcast, Future Fit, and I actually have been asked to work with Simpsper and Cardiff Met on some of this stuff and micro credentials, and along those lines, to be honest with you. And I'm sure we'll be getting some of the guests on this podcast to talk about that in a bit more detail. But no, thanks for that. Almost along those lines, we mentioned it earlier, but the Sport England investment in whole systems approach and place-based approaches. I know you're not in the sector as such now, but this is supposed to, be a place-based approach. And I know 10GM are currently doing some work, aren't they, on these leadership programs? What's your thoughts on this whole systems place-based approach?
I think they're really important, actually. I think the terms are thrown around a little bit willy-nilly and trying to simplify it a lot sometimes can degrade the quality, because I think sometimes systems are complex and whole systems are really complex, and that's okay. We can work in complex systems. We just have to recognise they're complex and try not to oversimplify. And I think that's where, like, the Sport England community place-based approaches are very good at looking at that wider system and engaging it. And I mean, I think being able to do that and do it correctly really helps, and to understand a whole system, especially now with ICSs, the integrated care systems as they are, and coming down into ICBs, and the way that locality funding is. If you didn't have that whole system understanding and that whole systems approach, you're not ever going to be able to fit in, and you're not ever going to be able to support the system and be a valued partner in that system. So I think, understanding it, but don't try and simplify it. Don't be scared of a complex system, which, like when I read the reports and stuff, it does try to oversimplify it. And I think that's a mistake. It should hold its hands up and say, this is complicated, it's really hard work. And you need to really engage people, and you really need to mobilise every part of the system. It's not an easy fix, but when you do it, you can get great results. Yeah,
good. Thank you. Thanks for that. Technology.
Yeah.
Again, touched on it a couple of times, but technology is here. In terms of the context of prehab, of the work you're doing with 10GM, what do you think the opportunities are to utilise technology properly?
I think utilising technology is a must. I think there's always going to be that instant recoil of health inequalities hat on of, oh, there's digitally excluded people. Okay, that yes, there is, and we can't overcome that for some populations. For some we can, because it's all about education and access, but for some we can't, because it is definitely a no-no, and we need to still be able to provide for them. So technology should never replace, it should always enhance and support, and I think there's a real good role for getting that right with certain people. Like, if you can do a prevention program, you will have 30% of people who will happily get on with a technological solution. And being able to assess that technological readiness in patients and people accessing services will lead to that, and it will mean that we can then really focus our resources where they're most in need, and it means that people will get the service that they require. And if people get the service they require, their experience of care and treatment and services is so much higher. And I think that's where technology will come in, is being able to provide that on the, what we call like the back room of technology, around like data sharing and being able to link data sets with healthcare data sets, linking with leisure data sets. Like one Wirral, I'd never say one Wirral, it's very hard for somebody with a speech impediment, but that service in the Wirral, they do an amazing job. So one of their programs around diabetes care is their data set highlights people with diabetes on an elective surgical list, highlights somebody with a type 2 diabetic, which instantly increases your risks of surgery. So if you're sat waiting for a knee replacement and you've got type 2 diabetes, your data gets highlighted straight away, and one Wirral will then be in contact with you to offer you a prehab service. I mean, that's technology at its best, isn't
fantastic,
it? Yeah, because it's also then hitting into health inequalities, because those people might not have actually been people who access primary care, which means they wouldn't have had a referral. It's an incredible use of backroom technology, not just the smart stuff that we all wear on our wrists.
Fantastic, thanks, Kirsty. That's a good one. Okay, we're down to the quickfire last few questions. It doesn't mean you have to answer them quickly, but there's three quickies, and then I'm going to ask you to think about who you could suggest we speak to on this topic in future. But that's the very last question. So this was touched on earlier as well. So there's general election looming. There's going to be a new government of some shape or form.
Hopefully.
What do you wish? One thing you could wish that government to do once they come into power?
Oh wow. Just for the leisure sector, or just personally? Because care would be the one. Just care about the people.
We could leave it there actually. Yeah.
But for what we're doing at 10GM, which is probably something that GM Active might like the idea of, is the election pledges that are coming through now from all the parties. We're making responses to them as what we would need to do to fit in with that government's pledge on healthcare, or that government's pledge on children and obesity. And that's what I would like to see, is that whatever government gets in, is that the pledge they are making now and their manifestos that they're making, they actually follow through with, and we get a government that understands that health is not a luxury. Everybody has it, and everybody's entitled to good health for a long time, and they really need to invest in that, because people only recognise their own health when it's not at the best. And that having a government that recognises that actually health is something that we should all keep, to me would signify the rest of the stuff that we need to happen would happen. There'd be a strategy, there'd be a national purpose, there'd be a vision for how that would be, and then we can align with it and show that we are one of the better providers of it, or maybe not, and that again is all right, because that just means we need to change. Yeah,
great answer, thank you. Second one, we currently sit in the DCMS as a sector. Do you think we should stay there, or do you think we should be in health, or none of the above?
I mean, ideally, I would like to see public leisure in health, but I don't think it necessarily should be at the moment. I think it's got a lot of work to do. I think I think ideally I'd like to see it eventually get there, but at the moment I just don't think it's at the place it needs to be when we look at workforce training, career pathways, ability to measure outcomes and impact, and prove that you could be health service ready.
Yeah, that's the challenge. Yeah, again, great answer. And finally, before your referral recommendation, are you optimistic about the future of public sector leisure? Funnily
enough, being out of it makes me more optimistic than I was when I was in it.
Explain.
I know, because being out of it, I realised that it's quiet. Like I said, it's quiet and there's a void and not a lot of people are talking about it. But it clarified, I think, being out of it and hearing conversations where it isn't part of and seeing where it obviously should be a part of makes me more optimistic, because I can see that there is a role to play and it's not playing it. And that I think that role is a lot bigger than what the aspirations are at the moment. Yeah. So it's made me more optimistic because I can see the quietness and I can see the gap a lot clearer.
Can you help us?
I'd love to help you. You know that.
Yeah, I know.
You just got to get me there.
Yeah, I know. So the final question is, I mean, it's been fantastic, Kirsty. I mean, obviously, you're one of us, if you like. You're one of ours. We've just lent you to 10 GM. Yeah. But it's also giving you that new perspective, fresh perspective, isn't it? Which is invaluable. So thanks for sharing that. Who else would you recommend we talk to? Only one person, because you could probably name loads, but one person that you think we could talk to that perhaps give us a similar perspective from the outside looking in a little bit.
Oh, from the outside looking in. All right, okay.
If you can, if not, an inside job will do. But
I would say outside looking in, I have a colleague called Katja, who works with, is a strategic lead, and GM Moving is one of her work streams. And I think she would be excellent. Yeah. Can I have another one as well?
Go on then.
I also think, just from the inside, you should speak to Lucy at One Wirral as well, because from the inside of what they're doing in One Wirral with their prehab service for cancer, but also their diabetes service, is incredible. So I think you should speak to her.
You can have two then.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Can I get their contact details off you, please?
Of course.
Yeah, fantastic. Kirsty, it's always a pleasure. It's been brilliant to see you. Yeah. Best of luck with the pregnancy.
Thank you very much. Yeah, you don't want me back before then, though, do you?
No, you'd be too expensive. No. Excellent. Nice to see you.
Yeah,
and speak soon. Thanks again.
Thanks.